Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and we're here for a session on exploring the differences between Power BI Desktop and Excel. Our speaker today is Dan McAllister, reporting practice lead at AX Mentor. It's great to have him here for the first time, and we're glad to have you on as well. I know people are still just getting into the session now. So as we begin, please know that Dan will be welcoming your questions. You can ask them really at any point throughout the event. Look for the Q&A block just to the right of the main presentation area, and feel free to enter those as we go. I know Dan will be making time for those during and after this and after the main presentation time. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand things off to Dan to get us started. So Dan, welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Is my audio okay?
Sounds good.
Great. So hi, everybody. I'm Dan McAllister. Like Jason said, I'm the reporting practice lead at AX Mentor. I'm also a functional consultant. Been in working with Dynamics AX and now 365 for operations for about 5 years. And prior to that, I was a financial analyst and accountant, so I feel like I've been on both sides of the fence. So hopefully I have a good perspective that I can share with you today. AX Mentor is a Dynamics AX and now 365 for operations partner. We're located out of San Diego, California, and we service all over the United States and also in Europe. And we've made an investment recently in BI. It partially is learning, partially is getting the tools to for our clients to make sure that they have access to data the way they need it. And so as a result, we've learned some interesting things that I think we can share with you today. So before I get into the learning objectives, I just want to make clear the purpose of today's session is to talk about Power BI Desktop. We're going to go through and we're going to modify some ad hoc sets of data. I'll take you through some demos, some examples, and see some interesting things in play, and then we'll publish these up to Power BI online. So for those who aren't super familiar with the Power BI ecosystem, if you are accessing out-of-the-box Microsoft-created or partner-created content, generally you will never look at Power BI Desktop. You'll go straight to Power BI Online, and you'll consume data that someone else has prepared for you. What we're going to show today is if you're preparing the data yourself in a self-service BI sort of scenario, either data out of AX, which I'll show you how to do, or 365 for operations, I should say, which I'll show you how to do at the end, or out of Excel or any other table. Really, the data source list that Microsoft has provided is pretty endless. So we're taking the approach of starting in Power BI Desktop, modifying the data ourselves, and then making it shareable in a way that's useful to our organizations. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and skip on to learning objectives. So we have 4 demos to go through, assuming that we have the time today, and that's going to be the primary piece of this presentation. One is the equivalent of SUMIF in Power BI, which is called the calculate function. And I've got some references at the end of my slide deck I'm happy to share with some more details on this, but we'll take you through sort of the calculate is the big kahuna in Power BI, where it allows you to do all sorts of really interesting things. Give you more context on that. We'll look at some cool visualizations that we can do for forecasting. And before I go any further, I should say that all of these examples come from the Power BI community forums. I had some downtime around the holidays, and I basically went on the forums and looked at people's actual problems to learn better how to do these types of things in Power BI Desktop. And people go in the forums and ask questions. They say, I've got this data set, and I want it to look like this, this final product, but I can't get there. And people go and help and give advice, and it's a great way to learn the tool. So these are all real examples that people have provided. So the second one is a forecasting visualization that you could provide to somebody that says, what if our sales go up 10% versus down 5% for these particular items, and so on and so forth. So it gives you some scenario analysis capabilities. Third one is a different type of visualization using the ampersand tool, which we'll explain when we get there. And then the final piece is the use of Power BI Query Editor, which if you are an Excel Power user, you might know as Power Query or Power Pivot. just some different tools that you can have in your toolbox there for transforming data that I think are pretty cool. And then finally, we'll look at sharing reports within our organization. So the format here that we're going to follow is, before I do that, why it matters. So Excel is great. It's a great tool. I've been working in it my entire career, and super valuable to know how to do things in Excel. However, it's not the greatest for sharing data. Unless you lock down an Excel worksheet, people can change it. You can't trust the data. You can put it up on SharePoint and lock it down, but still, same thing. It's not the most glamorous way to share data. So that's where Power BI really shines, is that ability to tell a visual story with data. Also to allow users to the same data set, so you can publish this, people can access the data online, on their phones, on their tablets, so on and so forth, and they have no fear of accidentally changing something and causing problems. Third point is to run repeatable transformations on data without macros. So we'll see in my fourth example where we get into Power Query, what we're doing with data transformations in that scenario is we're saying here's a base data set, run these transformations, split this column into two columns, and unpivot these columns, and so on and so forth. That's something that runs every time you refresh the data, so you don't need to do the same transformations over and over again every month end, for example, if you're building some month end reporting. So I think that is an important thing to learn. And then looking at visualizations that are intuitive and users can interact with, I think it's really interesting that Power BI brings to the table.
Hey, Dan, we have a question.
Sure.
Just asking, does Power BI Desktop come with AX 2012 or is it extra?
Great question. Power BI Desktop is a free program so long as you have an organizational login. So your whatever at axmentor.com login. However, to share Power BI Desktop files, to publish them and then share them. You can publish them for free, but if you want to share them throughout your organization, it requires a Power BI Pro license, which I believe is $10 per user per month. So Power BI Desktop, totally free, doesn't cost a penny. If you want to share within your organization, both the sharer and the sharee must have a Pro license, which may come in some enterprise agreements. It's not my area of expertise, but something that you can inquire within your organization about. Did that answer the question?
I believe so. And yeah, so anyone else who has questions, feel free to enter them in as we go.
Great. Okay, so the format that we're going to look at here today is I'm going to show you a picture of what we're trying to get to. We're going to look at the data set that we started with, and then we're going to actually walk through the functions to build the data. So I already have this data set in Excel, but what we're looking at here is an issues list. And so we've got a number of issues. We have the date that an issue is opened and the date that it was closed. And this particular person who's asking the question says, how can I build a table or a chart that shows my open issues over time? And so that is this. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and open up Power BI Desktop. And so when this loads, it offers for you to go get data. It shows you recent sources of data that you've pulled. I'll say get data. And these are all the different data sources you can start with. You can see there's things like Salesforce and Google Analytics in here. We're just going to go with Excel. And this is count of issues by date. This is Excel file that we're working with, and then if your data is in table format, or if you have multiple tables, which we'll see a little bit later, you can click on this and it'll give you a preview of your data. So I'm just going to pull in this data and load it. Kill my shit there. Okay, so we have our visualizations here in the top right. I'm just going to build a quick table of my issues and the date open and the date closed, just so we can see what the data looks like. By default, it puts the data in a hierarchy format where it goes year, quarter, month, day. I don't actually want that, so I can click this button and just, instead of the date hierarchy, just give me the date. So you can see date open, date closed. But you can see our issue numbers kind of look weird. Reason for that is if we go to the query editor, which is Power Query, which we'll get into a little bit more later, you can see that our issue number came in as a number instead of as text. So I want to click this and I want to say, my issue number is not actually a number. If it comes in as a number, then if I have two, such as this one that opened and closed on the same date, it's just going to sum these two numbers. So I don't want to do that. So I change this to a type of text, and I say close and apply, and then it's broken. I put that back, and that looks much better. Okay. So if you think about it, it's important to step back and think about what you're trying to achieve. So what we want here is we want a list of dates, and on each of those dates, a count of the issues that are open. So if I tried to add a column here that is number of issues opened, the issues that are currently open on this table, it doesn't really make sense because I've got a range of dates. I need for a single date is how many issues are open. So what we need to do is build a new table on the spot, which we can do in the modeling tab up top. We can create a new table. And there's, if you search online for this, then you can find, there's several different ways to do this, but I'm just creating a new table, and there's a function called calendar that gives you a table with one column of all dates between start date and end date, so I could hard code that. Or I could use a function to do so. So min-x, and the details of this aren't super important. The point is that we can do this. But what I'm doing is I'm saying build me a table of dates starting with my first date in my list. So the first date, which is the date opened, and ending with and I say OK. And on the left here, so right now this is in report view. I can go look at my data. I see my different tables here. And if I click on the date table, I can see a list of dates starting with February 1st, which is where my data started, and it goes all the way up to quote-unquote now. And so as now becomes tomorrow, then this table would continue to expand, which is better than hard coding. All right, so I'm going to add another table to my report here that shows my list of dates, and I'll change that to just the dates instead of the hierarchy. Okay, so I've got a list of dates. Now I want to know for each of these dates how many issues were opened. And so I'm coming over to my fields and my date table, and I want to add a new column to my date table. And so let's call this open issues. This is the name. Okay, so now we get into the calculate function. So the calculate function, this is like a big glorified sum if or max if or count if or any other type of if statement that you want to you could ever imagine, right? So what it's looking for is an expression such as count, and then apply any filters or any number of filters that you want. And you can use this really flexibly. I've got a link at the end that talks about some different things, but for example, you could say, give me a sum of all my sales, but then divide by my sum of sales on a particular period, and divide by sales in the year, and build interesting KPIs or inventory turnover ratios, things like that. This is kind of a catch-all that is extremely useful and important to master. So I'm going to use what's called count rows, because we want to count the number of rows in our issues table that are open on any particular day. And count rows wants to know which table I'm counting. That's table 1. And then I need to apply some filters. So I'm looking for a count, or to be included in the count, any row in my issues table where the start date and the end date encapsulate the date in my date table. So I'll say filter, and looking for the table, and then my date opened. You can just start typing and it'll find the field for you. So there's another function called last date that just says, give me the last date for that row. So this is effectively saying, count the rows in my issues table where the date opened is before the date here. And then there's this double ampersand, which says, in addition, also apply this other filter, which is really nifty because then we don't need to nest if statements. We can just apply multiple filters all in a row. So you see, I only use this filter function once, but I'm able to apply two different filters. So closed, let's go to generate state of my date table. Okay. So when I add this to my table now, I see my count of open issues by date. So on each of these dates, these are the things that were open or closed. So for example, we'll look at the very last one. So we see there are 4 issues open on February 13th. We see there's 3 issues at the end that all closed on February 13th, and then also this 4th issue. So always important to validate your data, but this is our list of open issues, and then we can easily visualize that by just changing what we have over here. So let's put in a line chart, and we can see over time how issues open, close, so on and so forth. So again, the specifics not super important on this. The point is to start learning about the calculate function and how that can be a useful tool for replacing some if in your repertoire and applying multiple filters to a single set of data. Also seeing how to create a table on the fly is important to know how to do. Okay. So that was this guy, the first example. If we go on to the second one, forecasting visualizations. So in this case, we're going to start with a data set that has a list of items and their forecasted sales. Imagine that these items are classified somehow, so we could add another filter on here that says, show me my items of a certain type that, so you can narrow down what you're looking at, so you can send it to department heads and they could look at their specific stuff. And then we're given the ability to say some scenario analysis on the right. So this first column will apply to here. What if our sales went up 10%? In our example, we'll also have some negative amounts because it's more realistic. Option 2, this is like a second scenario, and option 3, which is very optimistic. And this is the data set that we're starting with. So we'll have multiple tables in the same Excel sheet. So this is our base forecasted sales, and then there are multiply bys. So if something's down 20%, then it's 80% of the original value. So we just pre-build these in Excel to make our lives easy. And these are the calculations we'll do. Okay, so let me create a new Power BI desktop file. And we'll say get data again, and connect to Excel, and this is forecasting in Power BI. So these are all our different tables. So I've named them forecast, option 1, option 2, option 3, which are different scenarios. And I say load. Excuse me. And then let's pull in a table with our item and forecast sales. So this is our starting point. So what we're looking to do is bring in what's called slicers. So a slicer allows you to interactively filter some data. So it'll come in and say option 1, filter first, drag this over, and then option 2 is our second scenario. And you'll see I've numbered these just so they, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I don't do that, then the sorting is weird because it tries to be a little bit too intelligent. Doesn't know that -20 is below 10. Okay, so we've got our 3 options here. And so what we need to do is build the calculated measure that will reflect if we apply a filter from these different options tables. So I could click this filter all day and it doesn't do anything to my forecasted sales because it's not relevant. But you'll see that these are interacting weirdly because we want to be able to apply multiple filters at the same time to different points of data. So what Power BI Desktop does is when you bring in multiple tables, it tries to automatically identify relationships between those tables. So let's say that you're working with sales data and you have sales order header and sales order line data. It would automatically detect that those are related through the sales ID field, with the sales order ID field, which is super handy when you want that. In this case, I want to deactivate these relationships. So now if I click this, then nothing happens to these others. I'm not filtering out any values. Okay, so in order to get this, the last time we added a calculated column, now we want to add a calculated measure. So a measure only impacts a single value, whereas adding a column adds a whole column to your table. And so what we're using is, call this option 1. So I'm just going to use the standard if statement here. So what the function we'll use is called has one value. Has one value just says if there's a single value selected in a group, so that would mean we choose one of these in the filter, then return the value true. If not, return the value false. And so that works within our if statement. So if option 1 has a single value, then give me my forecasted sales times my multiply by. From the table. Else just give me my forecasted sales. And I'm missing a parenthesis. So if best practice to shift enter to split up your different functions. It's easier to troubleshoot. I think we got extra. There we go. Okay. So we added a calculated measure here. This is just called option 1. So by default, it gives me the same value for option 1 as for my forecasted sales, unless I come in and I make a selection here. So if I choose plus 10%, then this goes up by 10%. Down, same deal. So all I want to do is copy this measure. Unfortunately, there's no copy function, but we can just copy the text and create a new calculated measure for option 2. And we just option 2. enter, and that's now created as another calculated measure. And now we can see that we can do different scenarios, and the same would apply to option 3, which I think I'll skip for the sake of time. But again, the idea is that the specifics not the most important thing. The important thing is that you could give this to someone. You could say, if you want to look at your sales, and we could add another filter to identify for, let's say that we had a table of item types, and these first 4 items belong to a single department. They could go look at information for their particular department and see additional details. You can add cost information. You can look at margin and so on and so forth. It's just an intuitive way to visualize the data, which I think is important. Okay, on to the next example. All right. So online users per hour is the third example. So here we've got a list of start times and end times. We want to see who's online where, how many people are online when. It might be important for load balancing issues. I don't know. This is, again, the specifics not super important, but we are going to see some cool use of the calculate function that we'll get into. And this is the data that we're starting with. So we've got a user IDs here, start times and end times, and then just a table that has a table of times in the day. Okay. So what we want to know is for each of these times, how many people are online at any given time. So we'll create a new Power BI desktop file. And say get data. Pull it from Excel once again. So here we'll pull in all 3 of these tables, which I have not named, load them. And then typically what I do is I just put in a table of each of my things so that I know what data I'm looking at. Especially if I have a specific problem I'm trying to solve. So I'll create a few tables here. And prefer to look at it not in a hierarchy. And then a final table of my user and position. Okay, so we want to see, we want a count of who's online during a certain period of time, but we don't have a range of time yet. We just have a start time. You can't really say what's in this time, but before the next time we need to add an hour. We have an hour start, we need to add an hour end. So easy enough to do. We can just come in to table 2 and add a new column. And we'll call it hour end and say that is simply hour start plus 59.99. Okay. Times 24. So we're in a date format, and we want to increase our time by just under an hour. So you see that we're going from 12 a.m. to 12:59 a.m. And we've got a start. Sorry about that. Audio hiccup. Am I back online?
Yeah, we hear you, Dan.
Okay, so headset just cut out. All right, so we got a start time and end time, and we're going to build up a count here. So I will add another column. We'll call it online users. Say calculate table 1. Oh, sorry, count rows. Similar to what we did the first time. Table 1. We'll put in our filters. Where 1 start greater than or equal to the start time. Sorry, this should be 2. And then we've got our double ampersand again so that we don't have to put in a filter function a second time, so we can apply multiple filters to the same function. Say our end is less than or equal to end time. So it's fairly intuitive, some of the formulas, which I think is also handy. But so then if we do a count of online users, we can see a list here of, for these periods of time, who's online, and then we can add in, say, a bar chart of online users. Online users by, say, start. And we can just see this data graphically, and we could turn this into a pie chart where we've got count of users by position and so on and so forth. So, and point is, if we get this data out in some repeatable format or it spits out to a log file somewhere, we can pull that into Power BI Desktop. We can modify the data and then provide this as a tool where somebody can very easily see this information over and over again and refresh it well. Okay, so that takes us to our last example, which we're going to change direction a little bit. So we've been looking in Power BI Desktop. By the way, the language that we are using when we type in the format or in the top to create new measures and columns is called DAX, D-A-X. And so if you're ever looking online for information about how to do a certain thing, tons of information online, you just need to know what to search for, right? So you would look for DAX language, how to do calculate function or something. But what we're going to look at here now is Power Query, which is a whole different animal. It's also available in Excel. I'll show you how to do that. But it uses the M language, which is a little bit different. We won't get too much into that, but just know if you're trying to add some columns or create new pieces of data directly within Power Query, that's the M language. And we've got some resources at the end that you can use to help figure that out. But so this one's interesting to start with the source of the data. So we've all gotten a piece of data from someone at some point in time that is in a really poorly organized format that before we can do any sort of reporting on it, we need to clean it up. So here's an example, and again, this is somebody's real-life example where they have a series of projects and they're looking at it by quarter and by person who's working on that project. So this is how many hours they spent on that project or days or what have you. And we can't really do much with this, right? This is, yeah, it's hard to report on anything because you've got both columns and rows that are valid, and it's not in a way that we could parse to build a chart or a graph. So I'll show you how to do in Power Query to get from this to this, and it is really pretty slick. So I'll open up a new Power BI Desktop file.
Hey, Dan, as you're doing that, I had one small request from the audience that they want to get a good look at the whole formula after you type it, after you finish typing it in. So if there's like a formula help tip, that you could move that away or move your mouse away so people can see the full formula.
Sure. Do we distribute these PowerPoints out afterwards?
We can? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if I just launch it, I do have all the formulas here in each of the slides also. So if you care to get a copy of the slide deck, the details are all here also. So and then this guy, if anybody wants to take a screenshot, you're welcome to. This is for the forecasted sales, the scenario analysis. And then the first one we did was calculating issues open on certain dates. Okay. Okay. So we'll get a new data set and do Excel. We'll do Sky. So here's our table of data, and you'll see that what Power BI does is it nulls out any blank fields here. We can't really do anything with this as it is. So instead of saying load, I'm going to say edit. And edit's going to take me directly into the query editor. So if I were to shrink this down, you'll see here's Power BI Desktop for the file that I'm working on just now, and here's the query editor. So when you go into query editing mode, which you can go back and forth to as many times as you want, it actually opens a different window. And when you're making changes in here, before you can check those in, quote unquote, you have to say close and apply. So we'll make some changes here. So first one is the project name. It only exists once, but it applies to all the different lines. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into Excel and copy, paste, 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 copy, paste, paste, paste to clean up this data. Maybe there's a slicker way to do it that I'm not aware of, but can't be more slick than this, where I select the column I'm looking on and I say fill down, and it autofills. So it says take this row and apply this value until I find a different value, and then stop, and then take that one, fill that down, etc. So that's real great. And then these guys, essentially what's happened is I was given this data in a pivot table, more or less. But if it's in a pivot table, I can't build other visualizations based off of it. I need to unpivot these columns, which is this guy right here. And when I do so, it'll put this into a more consumable format. So it takes away some of the data that is not important. Like Mike did not work on Project 3 in Q4, for example. So that's gone because it has no importance to our data. And then, so it gives me project, timeline, attribute. I can rename this. Rename, say worker, and then rename this one to be hours, or days, actually. And so what's important to note is down the right, it shows the list of steps that you have applied. And you can go back and you can see, oh, before I changed the type, or before I filled down, this is what it looked like, and then after I filled down, this is the end result. And you can go back and forth between these steps as many times as you want. So in the beginning, I talked about how you can do repeated transformations without having to do macros. This is it. This is what I'm referring to. So I think that this is a useful tool, and I'll also show you how to do it in Excel. But so I've cleaned up my data. I'm still in the query editor. I need to close this and apply it, which is the button in the top left. And then as soon as I do that, the data is available here in Power BI Desktop. So I'll add a table, and let's say I go by project name and total number of days. So I can see that regardless of worker, that's my data. I can build a pie chart with project name and days. I could build another pie chart with worker and days, or timeline days. And so I can come in and I can interact with these. I click this and it transforms my data. It says I click Q1. If I click Q1, these are the number of days I worked on these various projects. I could also put in a slicer like we saw before with my different workers, and I could see for Toby, what did he work on versus Mike. And you can come in and you can add, see here, let's see here. Let's see the values. Anyway, not saying off the top of my head. We'll stop improvising. And anyway, so the point is, it's transformational data. It's easy to repeat the transformations. So let's say I get this file at month end every month, and I want to clean it up and report on it. If I build Power Query to do those steps, it'll take that data and transform it into what I need to. And if I need to go back and take a look at that again up in Power BI Desktop, I can just click Edit Queries. It'll take me right back to where I was. I can make additional changes, or I can undo changes, and then just say Close and Apply, and it puts me back here. Okay. Okay, so that's this. All right, so those are the 4 different examples I wanted to get through. Looks like we have just a little bit more time, so I'm going to go into data sharing. And so these are the steps that we'll take a look at. We'll publish this data to Power BI Online. And so what we're doing is we're publishing what's called a report. In order to share your report, you need to have it in the form of a dashboard. That dashboard then can be shared with your colleagues. It can be viewed on a phone using the Power BI app, which is free, or a tablet, or what have you. And we'll talk about data sources and refresh scheduling. So let's go ahead and get to it. So let's say that we want to publish this. I'll save it. And so to get this from Power BI Desktop to Power BI Online, I just click this Publish button. And it's going to want my, you can also sign in here. I just have not done that today. And say my workspace. So one of the things that's important to note, if you're going to share data, it's better to save it in a cloud location. If you have it shared on SharePoint or something, then anybody who has access to that data can refresh the visualization. Alternatively, we can schedule it as well. Okay, so it was published, and I'm just going to go to PowerBI.com is the website for Power BI Online. So this is Power BI Online, and if you've not been in here in the last month or two, they've changed up the way that this looks. So if I go look at my workspace, so I've got various workspaces. So these are some of our internal Xmentor workspaces. These are dashboards that have been created, reports, workbooks, data sets. And the report that we just saved is this guy right here. And if I click on it, it'll take me to the same report that I had in Power BI Desktop. So we're on this. This is great. However, we need something on a dashboard in order to share it. So I'll say pin live page, and I'll create a new dashboard and say dashboard. So this is going to pin the entire report. You can create a special phone view. So let's say you have a dashboard and it's easy to look at it from a, that's not what I was looking for. It's easy to look at it from a a computer or a tablet, but on the phone it's harder to read, you can actually create a special phone layout so that it looks different on the phone, which is pretty nifty. But if I go back to my so that was a report, that was this guy. Now it's created as a dashboard, which is this one, has a star that says it's new. I can see the same data, and then I can say share. So I can share this within anybody in my organization. And let's say I share it with one of my colleagues, and I start typing, and so my colleague Brandon, I could easily share with, and say check out this sweet dashboard, and hit share. And as long as he has the Power BI Pro license, he'll be able to also see this data. So it's an important thing we talked about at the very beginning. Everything we've done up to this point before sharing is free. Publishing it on my own dashboard is free. I could save the file in Power BI Desktop, and I could give it to somebody else, and they could open it. That would be free. But if I want to share it online, that requires a Power BI Pro license. Okay, there are some other limitations in terms of size that are pretty large. You can see all the details online in the Power BI Online, or PowerBI.com website if you go to licensing. But the big thing, in my opinion, is sharing. If you're going to use this organization-wide, you probably want to share data. Probably requires a pro license. So I just click share, and this would go off to him, and you get email saying, share that. And then he'd be able to access it the same way that I have. So easy as that. The complicated or more complicated thing is how to keep the data up to date. Because, let's see, down here, I can come in and I can say, I can refresh it on demand, or I can schedule a refresh. And there's some details here around, you have to have a data gateway if you're storing it on your personal computer, and so on and so forth. Which, again, is no cost. It's just a program you have to install. Typically, you would want to share this on a cloud storage type space that the people you're sharing with also have access to, because otherwise they're not going to be able to access or the refresh. They'll try to refresh it and they'll say can't find that file or what have you, because it's stored on your personal computer and your laptop might be off. Or so it'll only work for you for the refresh if you store on your personal computer. So there's that. One other thing, so we've looked at all Excel-based data sets today. You might want to look at other types of data sets, like something out of Dynamics 365 for operations. So let's say that you have access to some certain types of data. If I go back, create a Power BI desktop file. So let's say you have access to accounting data in your company and you want to pull that into Power BI and you don't want to go through Excel. You want an automatically, dynamically refreshing data set. We can do that directly here in Power BI Desktop. We can create some reports. We can publish them and share them within our organization without having to go through IT. So when I say get data, instead of saying Excel, I'm going to say OData. So this is how we access data in the new Dynamics 365 for operations paradigm. And so this is the URL for my cloud-based AX. So it's just without this garbage on the right, it's just this URL. So I literally just copied it. It's mad at me. So I copied this URL. Coming in, I'm saying this is my OData feed, but I have to end it with the word data. Not the most intuitive thing, but that's what you got to do. So you take your URL, end it with the \data. And now what this is going to find for me is all of the data entities in Dynamics 365 for operations that I have access to based on security. And now it's telling me that I don't have access. Let me try that one more time. say get data. Here. So what it should do is ask me for login information. Let me try logging out of this. Okay, we'll try this one more time. If it doesn't work, we'll move on. But it should ask for login information, and you want to log in with your Windows account. Here we go. So here's all the different tables that are available. These are the data entities. So if anybody's keeping up on the Microsoft nomenclature, data entities, for example, if I look for vendors, if I look at the vendor data entity, it has information about vendors beyond just what's in VendTable. So it's bringing in data from different sources to a single point to make it easier to report. So a great example is vendor name versus vendor ID. If you were to look at the vendor table, there is no vendor name because that's stored elsewhere in what's called the party table and all these other details. The whole purpose of having a data entity is to pull that data together to make it easy to report on. So in addition to vendors, we could look at sales information. So sales, you could pull in sales invoice header and line information. We could build reports without having to go through IT. We can build all these relationships, and this is working on demo data, so it doesn't have a lot of great information, but it's something, if it's interesting to your organization, it's definitely worth exploring. Okay. So we're running up on time here. I just want to make sure that you guys have access to these key resources. First one is the Power BI user groups, a fairly new user group, but people interested in Power BI, it's the same as AXUG and so on. The Power BI community forums, there's a wealth of information here. If you go to the desktop link from community.powerbi.com, and look at other people's questions and answers they've received. Very active community, people helping each other out. It's awesome. More information about the calculate function, which again is in the DAX language. More DAX resources from Power BI online. And then M language, which is Power Query. So these are some areas to get started if you want to learn more about those tools.
So Dan, we have some questions here coming in.
Okay, hit me.
All right. So the first one is going to challenge you a little bit, saying, Excel with Power Query and Power Pivot can do these things. Is it really worth moving to Power BI Desktop if you have to pay extra for the sharing? Dan, I think we may have lost your audio.
Sorry, how about now?
Yep, you're back.
Yep, so that's a great question. And it's all about how you tell the story with data visualizations and the importance of ease of access of using the Power BI online, either on your phone or tablet or on your computer. Also, the Power BI online dashboard tiles can be embedded directly in Dynamics 365 for operations, which I've seen important use cases for. Really, it's up to how interface you want your data to be. So yes, you can do it in Excel. It's the sharing and the visualization piece that is not as powerful. But I did want to show how to do the Power Query piece directly in Excel. So I'm in this table here, and if I go to the Data tab, there's this Get and Transform Data, which sounds very similar to what we had in Power BI because it is similar. I say from table range. It takes me to the exact same query editor that I had in Power BI Desktop. So if you're familiar with that, then this is a very easy transition where I can still come in and I can fill down, and I can unpivot my columns in this particular example. And then I say close and load, and it creates a new Excel workbook for me. So that's Power Query. It's been around for quite a while. It's not something that I knew much about before I started getting into Power BI Desktop. But yeah, so the value case is really around the data sharing and visualizations within your organization.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yes, and I'm sort of seeing them come in from a couple sources here, so please forgive me.
Okay.
Okay, so sending out PowerPoint to the participants, I think we said we will provide information on how people can get access to those slides. Next question. Does Power BI automatically recognize the relationship between vendors and party tables, or and party table, or do you have to build that in?
So, yeah, understood. So in the example I showed you, if you're pulling directly from AX data entities or D365 for operation data entities, some of those are already done for you in the data entity. But like the example I gave you, if you pulled in sales order header and sales order line, it would probably automatically find the relationship for you between those tables. However, if it is less clear to the system, then it won't. And it's not a perfect auto-generate relationships tool, but it is pretty good, and it's easy to build the relationships yourself if they don't exist. You just say this column to this column, and is it one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, and the relationship's built.
All right, I want to make a last call for questions here as we approach the top of the hour. Also, I do want to remind folks we have a quick survey that will pop up after you depart today. Your feedback would really be appreciated. We had a great response to today's event, and we want to know what you thought of it, and I know our speakers always appreciate that as well. Last question I have here, Dan, is just where can I find explanations about DAX formulas?
Sure thing. So here's a link to some basics, but really I would just search online. Microsoft has a lot of great information. There's also a number of blogs out there that talk about how to do specific things. And for me, and I think for many people, the easiest way to learn is to have a problem and then try to solve it. So I recommend having something or working on something that you think is interesting, visualize what you want your endpoint to be, and then start digging around for information on how to get there. And worst case scenario, go to the Power BI community forums and ask. People are always happy to help.
Great. Well, we will end it. I don't see any other questions, so I think we can end it there. Thanks, everyone, for the questions, for your attention today. And Dan, of course, thanks for putting this presentation together and sharing it with us.
Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure.
All right. We'll wrap it up there. Have a great day, everyone.